life has a curious and somewhat cruel way of reminding us that certain choices are irreversible. In a world where haste, pride, and curiosity push us to take risks, some outcomes are inevitable, even if they seem improbable. And if you think, that would never happen to me, maybe it's time to reconsider. Small mistakes, which at the time might seem almost comical or insignificant, can transform into life or death tragedies. We're not just talking about bad luck, but a fine line between decision and fatality, where every action carries a hidden price. But, after all, what can these insane, almost unbelievable stories teach us about the traps we create for ourselves? These narratives offer valuable lessons in understanding the limits we ignore, the fragility of life, and the steep cost of foolishness, whether through ignorance or improvisation in situations demanding attention. The truth is, we're closer to these traps than we'd like to admit. Now, prepare to dive into a series of stories that go far beyond the obvious and carry with them an urgent call to caution, reflection, and, above all, the value of life. Imagine a motorcyclist in New York, determined to make his voice heard against mandatory helmet laws, deciding that the best form of protest is to hit the streets without any protection. A bitter irony unfolds here, doesn't it? In the quest to prove a point, he ends up skidding and fatally injuring himself, precisely because he wasn't wearing a helmet. Sometimes life is like that. In the urge to break the rules, we forget for a moment the fragility of our own existence. This protest cost him what no one should ever underestimate, his own life. In situations like these, we ask ourselves, what drives a person to take such risks? It's not just a rebellious impulse, but something deeper. A need to affirm one's worth, to tell the world, I'm in control. We've all felt this urge now and then to challenge what seems imposed, especially if we judge it as a senseless rule. But here's the key. Defiance and foolishness walk together when we ignore the risk, and the value of life, far beyond imposed rules, becomes the only criterion that truly matters. Now, you might be wondering, are the rules always so clear? Not always, but choosing battles wisely is a lesson in wisdom. For every moment of impatience, there's a tragic example reminding us to think twice before challenging something in the name of freedom, without weighing the consequences. Remember, being prepared, using the right equipment, isn't just about obedience. It's a measure of respect for your own life. Imagine a worker in Japan, focused on the simple task of changing a light bulb. Nothing too extraordinary, right? Well, in a rush to get it done quickly, he opts to stack pallets haphazardly to reach the needed height. The scene seems almost comical at first, but soon turns into a cruel example of how impatience and improvisation can become a game of life and death. He loses balance, falls from the unstable stack, and this seemingly harmless decision becomes his last fatal error. In the rush of everyday life, it's easy to cut corners. Everyone has done it in some form, whether using a chair to reach a high shelf or balancing something on an unstable surface. But haste rarely goes hand in hand with safety. In a work setting especially, the need to follow safety standards goes beyond formalities. They exist to ensure everyone gets home safely at the end of the day. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment to stop and consider whether the shortcut is worth the risk. A brief reflection that could have changed the outcome of this tragic accident. This case reminds us that patience and caution are valuable. At work and in life, there's a fine line between creativity and carelessness. Sure, we want speed and efficiency, but life becomes the price when we overlook safety. So, next time you think about improvising, ask yourself if there's a way to act without compromising the essential, which is, above all, personal safety. Imagine a man in Sydney, intent on making some quick cash by dismantling a recycling truck. Seems simple enough, right? He dives into the task with makeshift tools, lacking the proper equipment, and with each piece removed, the risk grows. He feels confident but forgets that gravity doesn't forgive mistakes. With one wrong move, the load collapses onto him, crushing him instantly. In that moment, the laws of physics showed that nature is indifferent to our bravery or our foolishness. This incident highlights something worth considering. What we call a misjudgment. We believe we're in control, that we can figure it out, but life shows us that ignoring certain natural rules is the quickest path to tragedy. Gravity, for instance, is a silent but unforgiving force that doesn't distinguish between good and bad intentions. When handling heavy objects or tasks involving forces greater than ourselves, the only safe way is to use the proper equipment. This story reminds us that there are certain forces in the world we simply cannot ignore or adjust. Confidence, when excessive, turns into recklessness. Sometimes engaging in heavy tasks without proper preparation is irresponsibly flirting with danger. So, if you're ever tempted to challenge something that seems bigger than you, think twice. Gravity and other natural forces will always do their job, and it's up to us to know how to respect that. Imagine a German man, intrigued by an old World War II grenade, deciding to open the device with a saw. A scene that could come from dark humor, but one that actually ended in a fatal explosion. Curiosity, in this case, didn't lead to learning but to a tragic end. What seemed like a harmless object held a destructive potential that he, unfortunately, underestimated. This error is an example of how curiosity, when unchecked by caution, can come at a steep price, literally one's own life. How many times have we heard the expression, "Curiosity killed the cat"? Yes, but here it killed a man. We are naturally drawn to the unknown, driven to explore and understand. But dealing with danger requires more than mere courage. Handling explosives, even those that seem old or harmless, is no task for amateurs. In our thirst for discovery, we forget that certain boundaries are there for a reason. And when these boundaries involve explosives, the risk becomes a life and death matter. This incident reminds us that prudence and respect for the unknown are essential. Curiosity, when used wisely, leads to incredible achievements. But without proper care, it becomes a death sentence. If you ever find yourself faced with something you don't fully understand, especially if it involves hidden dangers, let caution prevail. After all, some experiences are best left to those trained to defuse real dangers, rather than detonate them. Imagine a determined lawyer with a busy schedule entering an MRI room with a gun in his pocket. Sounds like a scene from a movie, but it ended fatally. In his rush or distraction, he forgets a crucial detail: the powerful magnetic field of the MRI machine. As soon as he steps inside, the gun is pulled by the magnetism with an unforgiving force, accidentally discharging. A mistake that cost him his life and once again highlighted the importance of paying attention to details, especially where small oversights can turn into big tragedies. This situation shows us that it's often not the big danger that catches us off guard, but the negligence of small instructions. We've all faced moments where a minimal distraction could have caused serious trouble, but here luck didn't spare him. In an age where time always feels short and the mind races from task to task, this accident teaches us that attention to detail is an essential safety measure, even a matter of life and death. There's great value in pausing and reviewing basic instructions, especially when dealing with technology we don't fully understand. An MRI machine with its invisible magnetic field is a prime example of how science can be both ally and foe, depending on the respect we show for its rules. So, when dealing with any advanced technology, it's always worth remembering: a small oversight can, indeed, become a catastrophe. Imagine two men in Georgia, in a moment of relaxation, ready to open what they believed was a bottle of wine. Little did they know that the liquid was actually antifreeze, a highly toxic substance. A sip, and the mistake turned fatal for one of them. Here, a simple failure of perception reveals how quickly life can veer into tragedy. Instead of a celebration, what remained was a bitter lesson about the dangers of blindly trusting appearances. This kind of error, caused by lack of care, makes us think about how many times we've handled substances or situations without fully checking all the details. Something that seems harmless can turn into poison, and in this case, that's exactly what happened. Our idea of safety often rests on fragile assumptions, and life gives us signs to never ignore a thorough check. Antifreeze and wine. At first glance, an unthinkable mix, but one that reminds us of the importance of extra attention. So, situations like these remind us that our safety and survival depend on careful analysis, especially when dealing with substances we don't fully know. It may seem like a small detail, but developing the habit of checking labels, sources, and origins can prevent a fatal situation. After all, in the urge to relax and enjoy, Common sense is always the essential ingredient for keeping pleasure and danger separate. Picture this. A man mistakes gasoline for an alcoholic beverage, and in a careless act, takes a sip thinking he's about to feel the warmth of a drink. But what truly ignites is the dangerous nature of gasoline. And without realizing it, he lights a cigarette right after. In seconds, what could have been a small error in judgment turns into a fiery tragedy. Ignorance and carelessness, in this case, created a scenario where the laws of chemistry were unforgiving. This episode highlights the invisible danger of handling flammable substances without due care. In our daily routines, dangerous substances that demand respect and attention are closer than we realize. Any fuel, especially gasoline, contains compounds that become fatal when in contact with heat or flame. Familiarity makes us feel we know enough, but overconfidence when dealing with dangerous substances is a foolishness that life rarely leaves unpunished. This story isn't just a tragic anecdote but a warning for anyone who, at some point, handles dangerous substances in daily activities. When in doubt, always choose an excess of caution. Check, ask, analyze before any step. The flame may be small, but fuel doesn't choose when to reveal itself as deadly. So, let this tragedy serve as a reminder. Respect for each substance we handle is a matter of survival. Imagine a man in Ohio, perhaps in a moment of fun or challenge, deciding to swallow a live fish. What could seem like a silly stunt quickly turns into a struggle for survival. The fish, upon being swallowed, becomes lodged in his throat, blocking his airway. And in that instant, what began as almost comical turns into a matter of life and death for both the man and the poor fish, both caught in a fatal, accidental fate. It's intriguing to consider how a simple moment of carelessness, fueled by a small dose of bravado or even curiosity, can become a tragedy. How many of us have heard stories of people attempting something radical on impulse without thinking of the consequences? The truth is, the human body isn't built for certain acts, and the need for oxygen, essential and unyielding, leaves no room for these adventures without a high price. This case shows us that, no matter how silly they may seem, some challenges simply aren't worth the risk. This story is a powerful reminder. Before acting on impulse, it's important to consider the consequences, especially when it comes to our own safety. Life has limits that we don't always respect, but it charges the price when we push past certain points. Let this example serve as a reminder of the value of prudence, even in seemingly harmless things, because in risky situations, even a split-second hesitation can be decisive. Imagine a man in the UK, excited by the idea of a daring leap, looking down from a parking structure at the shallow river below. The scene invites him to test his limits, perhaps in search of a thrill or to prove some sort of courage. However, the calculation was wrong. The river was shallower than it appeared, and hitting the bottom resulted in a fatal outcome. Life, in this case, exacted a high price for a poorly planned choice, reminding us that not everything that seems fun is safe. This incident makes us reflect on the difference between courage and recklessness. The desire for adventure is natural. We've all felt the need to test our limits, but the question is when that desire overshadows caution. Many of life's challenges require careful analysis before any daring decision. A simple calculation, a depth check, could have changed the course of this impulsive act. Yet, at that moment, excitement outweighed reason. Here, the lesson is clear. The thrill of adrenaline isn't worth risking life without a minimum of preparation. Even when challenges are tempting, caution should always be an essential principle. Life doesn't reward those who ignore prudence. On the contrary, fate seems to like showing that every decision has its cost. So, when planning any adventure, ask yourself if the reward is worth the risk. Imagine a welder in Russia working on a piece of artillery equipment. In an attempt to clean or perhaps test some part, he inserts a fire extinguisher into a cannon. It sounds like an innocent improvisation, but the pressure buildup from the extinguisher, when activated within the closed structure, results in a devastating explosion. The mix of ignorance and lack of care proved costly, turning a simple action into a fatal tragedy, highlighting the danger of underestimating hidden forces in any work environment. This episode is a clear example of how safety often seems like an insignificant detail until something goes terribly wrong. In professions like welding, where we handle extreme pressures and highly reactive substances, caution isn't optional. It's essential. There's a reason every piece of equipment has strict instructions, and proper use of each tool is the only guarantee to avoid accidents. It's no exaggeration to say that ignorance in high-pressure environments can become a death sentence. The takeaway here is that, no matter how confident one is, there's always room to respect instructions and the structure of each tool. Sometimes we forget that personal safety lies in small precautions, not just confidence in one's own skill. For anyone working with pressure, fire, or dangerous equipment, attention to detail is a matter of survival. Life is in the details, and sometimes a single mistake can put everything at risk. So, after hearing these stories, is it still worth ignoring your instinct for caution? Life exacts a high price for recklessness, and each of these examples makes clear that the cost can be life itself. Now, the question remains, what are you willing to do to ensure that your choices respect the value of your life? Think of all the times you've underestimated a detail out of haste or distraction. How many opportunities have we missed to act with more caution and less impulse? If these lessons seem intense, it's because they are. Being prepared and aware isn't just about safety. It's about respecting yourself. So, how about starting to apply this knowledge? Evaluate your choices and consider, is the risk really worth the price? And to continue learning and growing, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Let's build a more conscious life together, far from the traps of recklessness.